Well, it's a spit-shiny new year, you gloriously miserable accursed. Herle here with the smartest, sweariest, turtleneckiest political panel in the whole goddamn universe, although Kory's let us down today. Kory Teneycke, Jordan Leichnitz, and Scott Reid. Good to see you, friends. Grapes, it's been 3 fucking weeks since we were last together. Happy New Year, everybody. Right? That's right. We did have a couple of beverages in Saskatchewan. That was fun. It was fun. Yeah.
Folks, I've got a burning feeling that 2024 is going to be the gall darndest best year yet. Are you with me?
No, I have an overarching sense of despair.
Yeah, no. More Krypton.
Yeah. All right. Today, courtesy of the fertile mind of Scott Reid, who suggested it, we're doing a holy fuck, it's 2024. What are our political predictions pod? What's going to be the sleeper issue of the year? Who's the surprise politician to watch? And a few more categories. Plus, each of us is going to offer up a New Year's resolution for the political player of our choosing. Our cursed clipping is from David Baxter at Global News on Premier Canoe's comments setting the stage for a Manitoba carbon price carve-out. And then it's Gordon bringing in the first hey yous of the new year. So, guys, not much happened in politics while we were away. The usual Trudeau Vacation kerfuffle, which I can't understand. I, honest to God, can't understand how he keeps taking these vacations and how they keep fucking up the comms about them. You know, I hear people tell me regularly, this guy's got the fire in his belly. This guy wants to beat Poilievre. This guy's here. His mission is to beat Poilievre. Well, that seems to me inconsistent with taking a $10,000 a night freebie vacation in this environment, doesn't it, Jordan?
Yeah, well, and I mean, I don't want to preview my Hey You, but more concerning is, I think, the two stories on who's paying for it. It's just sloppy. This was an entirely predictable question that was going to come up from the media. And I think that the other thing that it's a bit telltale of is what the conversations are like inside the Prime Minister's inner circle about these things. I think it's obvious he's surrounded by smart people. They know this is a problem. This is a known issue. This reinforces something that's already a perception problem. I am positive that multiple people gave him the advice that this was not the right choice to make. And he said, I'm going to do it anyway. And look, don't get me wrong. Everyone's entitled to a vacation. I think, the Prime Minister just as much as everybody else. But it matters how he does it. It matters where he goes. It matters, the amount of money that it costs, and it matters who pays. And I think that the fact that he very clearly didn't heed that advice is not a good sign. And it doesn't, to me, sound like somebody who is gearing up to address vulnerabilities ahead of another run. It sounds like somebody who's saying, fuck off, this is my personal time, I'm going to do what I want. And that's not a great attitude.
Kory, what's your take?
Well, I have very little to add or tack on to that answer. I think Jordan kind of summed it up pretty well. But look, it's sort of amusing, as you pointed out as well, David, to see somebody make the same mistake over and over again. And this has been going on since the first vacation he took when he came in as Prime Minister. And it's been just predictable versions of the same story. I think he's gotten away with a couple as well. He's been out on Vancouver Island. He's been vacationing on expensive luxury properties of friends as well. Anyway, it's a political problem, and saying that you're going to get a pass because of a technicality that it's, quote, a friend and therefore the rules don't apply. That's an anomaly that should be corrected in the Accountability Act, not embraced by the Prime Minister if he's hoping to fare better than he is currently in his re-election efforts.
Scott, matter, not matter?
It probably doesn't matter in the big sense of things in terms of everything else that's going to, get thrown into the Irish stew that will be 2024 that will determine how things play out in 2025. But it is, I think, Jordan,
wouldn't you have
really
physically thrown yourself in front of Paul Martin to prevent him from doing that?
Yeah. But, I think that Jordan really puts her finger on it. I think that what this tells us, and the consistency of this story coming up year after year, season after season, is that there is within their PMO and their circle, there's a no-fly zone here in terms of willingness to heed advice, willingness to solicit advice. And so I just think that that's a lump that they've decided they'll just take year after year. So, and we have to also put it in the context, and we've sort of hinted at this before. I think a lot of these stories now are put into a revisionist context of, a marriage that has been breaking up, and we've all avoided, and the media have avoided that topic, correctly so. But that, I think that's a big part of the explanation. I think that PMO get told, listen, I'm telling you right now, this is something I'm doing for the family, and I'm not going to tolerate a lot of talk about it. And I think that that's probably what's going on. Now, how within even that context, the Prime Minister's office could say, well, this holiday has been paid for. Whoops, I mean, this holiday is not costing you. That's what we meant. It's not costing you taxpayers money. How you can get that glitch is kind of a head shaking. And I agree strongly also with Kory that this call a friend thing, like this makes no sense. And
so an MP cannot accept a ticket to a hockey game or a meal, but the Prime Minister can accept $100,000 because it's from a friend.
It doesn't make any sense. And they go, well, we ran it past Conrad von Finkenstein, who, I loved in Salem's Lot, but I don't think should necessarily like that. If that's the rule, then the rule is fucked. And I say this as somebody that, hates these kind of like, all politicians are corrupt and out to fuck us. I hate those kind of stories. I hate that kind of attitude. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true of Trudeau. But, it's head shaking.
All right. So the other thing I noticed over the holidays. Go ahead, Kory.
Well, I was just going to say, I bet you that Prime Minister Mulroney is just banging his head against the wall, not claiming that Karl-Heinz Schreiber was a good friend, because then it all would have been just fine. Like you can take this stuff to whatever level you want, right? But like the whole like notion of friend not friend, it doesn't make things less icky; it makes them more icky.
Yeah, the last thing I'll add is that I think it's baffling, this whole notion, like we're going to ask the ethics commissioner, we're going to get permission, and then that's trotted out as though it in any way negates the political problem that the stuff was known that it was going to cause. Like, this is weird to me. They know that's not effective. We know that's not effective. The media knows that's not effective. So, like, why engage in that bizarre charade?
Yeah, I know. All right, Scott, I'm coming back to you, though, on my next one, because just when liberals, just when it feels as a liberal, like there's no hope and there's no comeback path and you can't see how we can win the next election, along comes Leslyn Lewis. Along comes Leslyn Lewis to say that Canada should leave the UN. So, obviously, she's not on the memo. And does this portend, perhaps, that the caucus is a little looser than we had confidently talked about at the end of the year about how impressive they were in managing people like her? I mean, because if there's a route back, it does involve those kinds of caucus members saying those kinds of things.
Well, I mean, this kind of starts to fall into predictions for 2024, but I think 2024 is going to see a Leslyn Lewis test applied. I don't know if I can, I'd love to, as a partisan liberal, say that it just is indicative of a broader caucus issue. I think that may not be true, but I think at minimum, it's a specific leadership test, because Lewis is not going to sit idly. And she is going to, she's going to say something else like this. She's going to do other things like this over the course of the year. She'll do things that are more extraordinary and more challenging, and they're going to have to come down on her. And I think it's going to be really interesting how they handle her specifically and all that entails. I just think, I think there's a real maturity test for Poilievre and his team as to whether she's going to be in caucus by the end of the year. Because I think she's going to throw 3 grenades, or at least she won't throw them. That's the problem. She doesn't throw grenades. She just uncorks them, right? Yeah. And then just
throws them into the caucus room.
Yeah. So, and by the way, I just want to underscore, like, this UN thing, and lots of people have views about the UN and all that kind of stuff. And I'd like to see the UN reformed and more. But in a time when we're watching this war unfold in the Middle East and we're seeing the tensions here at home just skyrocket with protests in Toronto and roads blocked and overpasses plugged, to sort of say, well, let's veer headlong into an argument about the globalist conspiracy, like this anti-Semitic garbage, and how the conservatives also want to be as pro-Israel as anybody has ever been. I mean, there is a fundamental inconsistency and incoherence there, all of which I think, again, they're going to have to deal with her because she does not give a fuck, and she's crazy as a box of matches.
Yeah, Jordan?
Yeah, I mean, I have a different take on this one. So Look, this is kookiness. I think it's kookiness that reflects a Leslyn Lewis problem rather than necessarily a caucus-wide problem. She's a frequent flyer on the crazy plane, if you will, on some of these things. And so I would, like Scott, I expect to see maybe that come to a head this year, because I actually think, and there are a lot of MPs who endorse a lot of very crazy petitions. It happens pretty frequently. And so I'm maybe less incensed by her involvement with this really off-the-wall petition. Although, I agree with Scott this is not a helpful optic for the Conservatives for all of the reasons that he enumerated.
Wait a second, Jordan. She didn't just sponsor to Parliament a petition that came to her from her riding. She's out there soliciting people to sign the fucking thing. I
know, but there's crazy stuff like MPs do like that. It's not unprecedented, right? So it's bad. Don't get me wrong, but it's not off the wall bad. But where I would say she has done worse stuff, like the meeting with Christine Anderson and the AFD, that's worse stuff. So to me, the question is more what does the year hold for Leslyn Lewis? What else is in that bag? And I think that she's got a track record of things that have more intent and more damage behind them even than this. This is bad, but this is, to me, not the worst of the offenses that she's committed. The thing that I'm really interested in is, has anyone heard from Michael Chong? Is he okay? Does he need to blink twice if he needs a rescue? There is a real problem going on in the Conservative caucus right now around foreign affairs issues. You had the whole kerfuffle ahead of Christmas around whatever pretzel they're twisting themselves into on the carbon price in Ukraine. Now you have this happening, and nobody really seems to hear a word from Chong, somebody who has actually got some credibility with the normies. But you have Leslyn Lewis taking up all sorts of space on this issue. And so that I actually think is
Michael Chong took himself out of cabinet once on a point of principle, and I suspect he doesn't intend to do that again.
Well, okay, maybe, but effectively, it's sitting on his hands while all this goes down. It's sort of the same thing, right?
But what was the point of principle that he took himself out of cabinet on? The Joe Clark community of communities guy in the caucus who makes his way into cabinet is offended by recognizing the distinct nature of Quebec within the Federation. It's kind of fucking bizarre. I know that as you said, Jordan, all the normies like Michael Chong a lot, but I think there's still some explanations owed as to what exactly the point of principle was that he took himself out the first time on. Was, but
sure, but
anyway.
Poilievre should let
Corey, they can't fire Leslyn Lewis. Scott's wrong. They can't fire Leslyn Lewis because part of their strategy is to suppress the PPC vote as much as possible.
Sure, they can. The day after Poilievre becomes prime minister, what I view this as is people doing their best to audition for cabinet right now, and some people are the audition is going better than others. But there's once you actually are in government, provided Poilievre continues to hold it together the way he has been, which is quite capably, until after the election, and you get to pick a cabinet. You go from having 3 carrots and only 1 stick to having 1,000 carrots and about 500 sticks. And your ability to manage caucus, whether it's through the naked exertion of power, or whether it's through buying them off 1 carrot at a time, it goes up infinitely. And, the people who want to have a big role in cabinet will behave well between now and the next election campaign. And if there's somebody who costs the party, some seats, or God forbid, government or a majority government, the fields will be sown with their bones, because it's not going to be tolerated after an election campaign. But that's when the leverage really comes into play, and where people's contribution or lack thereof will be recognized.
Do you think he's just going to let her do her thing until then?
Well, I think he'll try to police as best you can. And I think they've been doing a very good job of that overall. But even the best goalie in the NHL still gets some pucks to make it past them into the net. So you're never going to have 100% on this stuff. And some people are going to be more problematic than others. Leslyn Lewis is obviously one of those. But let's keep it real around this. I don't think it's a real proposal. It is a internet survey that's designed to capture people's data and information so they can market other things to them in the future. It is a tried and true campaign technique that every party uses. It always gets used on issues that are a little closer to the sun than what you market in a general election campaign, but it's done to capture voter information and use it for future campaigns. So, I think we should all let go of our pearls that we're clutching around this shit, because every party does it, and I don't think it's that big a deal.
That's exactly what I would expect a Soros-sucking, establishment-invested turncoat like you to say. And when the revolution comes, Kory, it's your head that's going on the first pipe.
Right. Well, there'll always be Robespierre's out there, but how that ended up.
I have very fond memories of the 2004 federal election, and I've fond memories of observing the Wild Rose defeat in the Alberta election. Now, I know that these caucus people can reframe the party. They can hurt you when they.
Ask Randy White in 2004. You have an idea of how much that hurt us, and he wasn't a newcomer. But. Yeah, that's, I think, I don't know. Does that change anything that I said? It's this is an addition. And if you end up costing the party something, it ended Randy White's career. He is still a curse word in the Conservative Party. 20 years later, people still fucking hate the guy. Because he cost Stephen Harper government in the view of Conservatives. Now, whether everyone else agrees that was what it hinged on or not, but that's what the internal narrative coming out of the campaign was.
Yeah, I think she's driving news way too often, way more often than I would be comfortable with in the Conservative leader's office.
Look, I hear mixed reviews from people, but all reviews become one review if you end up if you. Well, there are people who like
Batman villains seem to like her.
Just a light flirtation with fascism, guys. Don't worry about it. Just a light, a little,
I'm not gonna be calling the black woman in caucus a Nazi, which is kind of the road that we've gone down on this in the past, which I think is kind of silly. So, look, she is a social conservative, and it's not everybody's cup of tea. And if you want to actually get into the substance of the beefs with the UN, there's a there. What legitimate organization has the Human Rights Committee dominated by countries like Iran, Saudi Arabia, China? How many concentration camps do you have to be operating in your jurisdiction? How many gays do you have to throw off the roofs of buildings? How many,
Fair enough, Kory. Fair enough.
Into that argument because I don't think so.
Fair enough. What does the polling say about pulling out of the UN? Either how important a priority is for people, or whether it's a good idea.
If you're going to have a conversation about the UN on that basis, there is some utility in it. But to just take things that are typical campaign tactics used by every party, and on issues where there actually is a bit of a there, and then spin them into this is going to cost you the election, that is, I think, a stretch. What was harmful about Randy White was a direct violation of the framing around abortion that the prime minister or the want to be prime minister, later to be prime minister, Stephen Harper, had spent a lot of time and effort marketing and saying what he was not going to allow to happen. And it was a direct violation of that on an issue that affects, potentially 50% of the population.
Well, it was same sex, wasn't it? So, he wanted all gay couples to move to a country that he said would be called Humunculi.
Yeah, right. There you go.
I'm not kidding. That's what the fucking tape was. And I remember it well. It was the best moment of my adult life to that point.
Happy New Year, you glorious hurly-burlyites and accursed. I'm sure a bunch of our listeners have made resolutions for 2024. It's what people do as the calendar turns, eh? They make a few changes. Or try to. But maybe not shockingly, I'm going against the grain. Taking my inspiration from Stuart Smalley on SNL in the mid-'80s. Google it if you don't know. I like me, you like me, so doggone it, I'm going to keep doing me. You all know TELUS, our presenting sponsor, has a similar belief and consistency in how they live their values and social purpose, the core of which has a lot to do with this little maxim. They give where they live. So I want to throw a little light on how TELUS struck up a partnership with a local startup back in 2017 to help them do just that. Benevity is a Calgary-based outfit that creates software to help companies implement their corporate social giving programs with maximum efficiency. Basically, it helps TELUS team members, current and retired, easily track their volunteer hours, create and sign up for volunteer activities, and make donations. On a corporate level, Benevity also enables TELUS's community board grants to charities all over Canada. You know what happens when you have an idea that makes doing good even more powerful? That idea grows. Benevity has exploded to become one of Western Canada's largest startups. From a small room above a local shawarma shop to offices in Calgary, Victoria, Toronto, California, Geneva, and Barcelona. Some of their other customers? Nike, Coca-Cola, Microsoft, Apple, Google, and over 900 leading brands around the world. Not too shabby a client list. That's what happens when companies like TELUS and Benevity bring common goals to the table. Good business meeting good purpose to make deeper connections and greater impact around the world. All right, let's move on to the fun part of this show. This is Scott's predictions.
Yeah.
Right. And we're going to make him go first on the first one, and we can all pound on him. All right? You ready, everybody? So, sleeper issue of 2014. Scott, what is the sleeper issue of 2014?
It's 2024, you goddamn dinosaur.
2024. Fuck, I'm old. All right, let's cancel the show. I'm so inspired by Kathleen Wynn's op-ed that I am revealing my fucking age here. 2024. Yes.
2014. I love it. Okay.
It was a better year for me.
Yes. I recall it well.
Trying to remember.
My sleeper issue for 2024 is healthcare. I think that people at the federal level like to roll their eyes and go, oh, not that old chestnut. The federal liberals are going to try to trot it out. Or they say, if you're the liberals, inexplicably, they say to me, well, that issue's been dispelled. We had a large increase 2 years ago. And so that issue's done. I mean, we know that at the local and certainly at the provincial level, this issue is driving dissatisfaction and anxiety. We've seen its ability to turn provincial elections. I'm not predicting that it will turn the next federal election. I'm not predicting the next election will be about healthcare. But it remains a gigantic anxiety on the part of most Canadians. I think that the Conservatives can be tempted into an adult discussion about healthcare and its delivery. And I think that our friend in Alberta is going to absolutely catalyze this discussion. I think she's being reckless. I think she's exposing herself to political harm. And I think she's exposing the federal Conservatives to political harm. I think this issue is going to bubble along loudly in a whole pile of provincial capitals over the course of the year, and I think that it has an ability to migrate.
How do the Libs associate Poilievre with provincial Conservative administration of healthcare?
Well, if he's wise, he'll distance himself from those things, which I think he will, and he's been really reasonably successful at that. But I think that you go hard by taking I think one of the failings of the Trudeau Liberals is to see the opportunity of provincial conflict, not just provincial cooperation. They seem to try to duck these fights, and I would go at one of these fights, in particular, I think with Danielle Smith, and I don't know that I need to actually make the Conservatives the villains on it. I want to make myself a champion on it. I actually think it's a good values proposition for them. So I think that healthcare is going to be a more consequential issue than people think. And when people shake their heads and say, oh, that's such an immature, knee-jerk political thing, and or that issue really isn't a federal issue, I think they're dead wrong. And I think that this thing has the ability to affect people's thinking.
Kory, what's yours? What's your sleeper issue of 2024?
Well, I think it's going to be these. I think there's some big Supreme Court of Canada rulings, but like one of the ones that I think will be most impactful to people who listen to our podcast is going to be the Supreme Court decision around blackout periods for third party campaigning, et cetera, et cetera. This is a campaign. This is rather a reference going back to your time provincially in the Wynne government. David, this is the working family's challenge to the limitations on third-party advertising, both within and outside of campaign writ periods. But if the Supreme Court upholds what the lower court has said on this, basically all the rules are out the window, and we're going to have a system that I think is very similar to what you see in the U.S., where there's going to be super PACs, there's going to be huge amounts of money flowing into
Citizens United.
Yeah, it's going to be something akin to that. And I think the response is going to touch every province and every political jurisdiction across the country. And they're going to have a choice between getting rid of the sorts of rules that we've been seeing slowly coming in over the last 4 decades, around more transparency, about more restrictions and accountability around how money is raised and spent in politics. And it's going to go exactly the other direction to either totally dark or totally unrestricted or some combination of the two. So I think that's going to be a very consequential thing that people don't see coming. And, it'll be less consequential, I think, if the Ontario law is upheld, although that'll have ramifications too, because Ontario law is much more restrictive than elsewhere in the country. But either way, it's going to have a big impact on campaigns and people who run them, which is who a lot of our audience are.
Yeah, fundraising was certainly a lot easier when you could start off by going to the banks for $500,000 each.
Yeah.
Right. Jordan, what's your sleeper issue of this upcoming year, whatever fucking year it is?
Yeah, well,
yeah.
I mean, imagine you could just redo the decade. You're like, what? So I was with Scott.
I would do some things differently.
Would you? Yeah, I was going to say that would be a good show. We could just everyone had a redo.
I'd comport myself differently on a personal basis. I'll tell you that.
Yes. Okay. So I was with Scott. I had healthcare. Healthcare is my sleeper issue. I think this is something that even though the headlines have been taken and obviously affordability and interest rates have really eaten and are really pressing people at the very top, this continues to bubble very strongly under the surface. People are experiencing frankly, a collapsing healthcare system in different ways across the country. Like 8-hour ER wait times have become the norm. ER closures are becoming more and more common. Lack of access to family doctors, really at all points, surgical wait times, everything is getting worse. And the system having been on the brink and COVID having pushed it beyond the brink. And now that we're out of that COVID period, the fact that people aren't really seeing material improvements in the healthcare system is really punishing provincial governments. Like you can see this, like Go is living this right now in full painful color. As you mentioned, this can turn elections. I
love the people we know who think that Legault's in trouble because of things like McGill.
No.
Yeah, no.
He's in trouble because Quebec.
No one ever got elected beating up on English.
Inarguably the worst healthcare system in Canada right now, and people are tired of it. We saw Wab Kinew win on the issue, really largely of ER access, of getting people better access to healthcare. I think it's interesting, what you're seeing in BC, where EB, I think, pretty smartly, they made some big investments in the human resources side, which is where a lot of the pressure points are now. So you've got the question of federal funding, which is always going to be there, but now it's also flowing down to the provinces. And how do you deal with this human resources and the staffing crisis? And so you're seeing different provinces take different approaches. Ford obviously has chosen to go in and bolster some of the private delivery. So we're going to see what happens there. But there remain big issues, right? And I think that what the special sauce will be for the federal folks in the coming year is cornering Poilievre on his views on the delivery of healthcare? And what are the strings that he would tie to any federal funding that's going to the provinces to alleviate some of these problems? And I think that that could be a really, really interesting conversation, because the other thing that's going to happen in the coming year, we're already seeing hints of it, is there's always going to be these expanded attempts at actual two-track healthcare, like, private clinics opening up, things like that. When you see these wait time pressures in the public system, you get these attempts. And so what's going to happen? Is the federal government going to take on provinces where that's being allowed to happen? And what's Poilievre going to say about all that? So that's something that I'll be watching to see how it plays out in the coming year.
I think this is all wishful thinking on both your parts on this. This is not animating the electorate, and and there is a huge credibility gap for every party around this. Like, healthcare scores high as an issue always, and credibility for politicians talking about their magic solution that they're going to bring in on this stuff is low. And Rob Canute's going to face this himself. Like, he's promised to pull rabbits out of hats around healthcare delivery, which he will find are very hard to pull out. Everyone's dealing with versions of the same thing. There's a lack of people working in healthcare. There's a lack of funding, largely driven at the federal level. The NDP are trying to make it worse by spending money on new entitlement programs like universal pharmacare. But at the end of the day, this is a fever dream you guys are having around what you're going to be able to fight a federal election campaign on. Like, it's not this.
We'll see. But I refuse to accept the premise that it's worse to go into a campaign with more healthcare offer for voters than less. And so I remain interested in what Poilievre's offer will be on this.
Well, it's been weaponized in the past, Kory. You're right. It's an important issue.
You need people willing to play along. But if you're saying we've dug a giant pit the size of an elephant and we put pointy sticks at the bottom of it, and now we're going to put a little carpet over this, and we're going to hope that Poilievre walks up and falls into said pit and impales himself on the spikes. Come on, guys. This is a cartoonish view of what's going to happen.
Although
we covered
Kory,
the carpet in leaves, Kory.
Yes.
Kory, it wasn't only Randy White who fucked Stephen Harper in 2004. Ralph Klein, in my view, quite deliberately fucked Stephen Harper by taking our bait on private delivery and having a fight with us. Right?
Yeah, so who's going to do that? Who's going to do that?
Yeah, I was going to say.
Danielle Smith is doing it. Man, this is great, Kory. You're literally wandering up to the trap and licking the cheese. I can't wait. I hope every conservative adopts the same perspective.
I think there's points for Poilievre and sparring with her if need be. It's an area of the country where there are no seats at stake for Poilievre if he gets in a fight with Smith. He's going to win all those seats anyway, so why not? And there are votes, I think, in the rest of the country and fighting with Smith if you're Poilievre. So
he's going to have to he's going to have to very decidedly break from her on the CPP. So it'd be interesting to see if he would break
already
from her.
Has, but more. Do you know what I haven't seen happen in quite some time is Danielle Smith out talking about CPP. I think that's basically faded into the background.
Yeah, that would be good for Poilievre if true.
We'll see, yeah.
Yeah. By the way, just to wrap it up, I think I don't see it as a major election issue, but I do see it as emerging as part of the discussion, which is poverty in the country. I think that a combination of rapidly expanding homelessness, which is rendering cities much more uncomfortable for people, not just the homeless, but the non-homeless as well. I think the lineups at food banks, the level of food insecurity that's happening in the country. There's an underclass developing in Canada that people are, I think, not going to be comfortable with and are not comfortable living among. And so I think that that's going to be, especially in the cities of the country, an increasingly important part of the discourse as time goes on.
Yeah, I tend to agree, but I think it's going to manifest itself a lot around the issue of crime.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. I want to talk for a minute about an unsexy, plain brown, unprepossessing thing that has nonetheless managed to acquire iconic status in the Canadian institutional memory. The railroad boxcar. We've all seen them at some point, usually so many bolted together behind a locomotive that you can't see the end of the train. Every kid on the prairies, and quite a few elsewhere in Canada, has squirmed in the back seat of the family sedan at a rail crossing, watching a solid wall of those rectangular brown cuboids, yes, that's the geometric term, clicking by for what seemed like forever. Boxcars have looked basically the same for nearly 200 years. That timelessness has made them famous. Bandits chased them in westerns. Hobos jumped onto them in the 30s. Stuntmen leaped out of their sliding doors in movies, and over the decades, they transported just about everything everywhere. Our sponsor, CN, operated wooden boxcars during the company's early years, 30,000 of them at one point. They were eventually ruled fire hazards and phased out. In the 50s, the railway began using steel boxcars. One particular fleet was nicknamed Buffalo Cars because of the Manitoba buffalo image each one displayed. They were originally used to move newsprint, then modified to haul grain to Churchill and Thunder Bay. The arrival of specialized hopper cars in the second half of the last century removed the grain mission from boxcars, but they remain in use for just about everything else. Modern boxcars are bigger and more sophisticated, often refrigerated or cushioned. A few years ago, CN ordered 800 new ones, 60 feet long, high capacity, and yes, still brown. It might seem a little counterintuitive to be spending millions expanding capacity like that in a period of economic uncertainty. But CN believes that constant reinvestment in the railroad, regardless of the economic cycle, is wise. Massive disruptions to supply chains in Europe and Asia have put pressure on Canadian producers. And governments in North America are talking a lot about nearshoring, and there's a shortage of truckers. So CN needed more boxcars for forest products, or metals, or minerals, or auto parts, or bagged agricultural products, or whatever. Because, as I've said here a few times, cargo has to move, and boxcars just keep rolling. All right, surprise politician to watch in 2024. Jordan.
Okay, so my pick for this one is Mark Miller. So I think that Mark he's got a couple things that's going to make him an interesting person to watch in the coming year. So he's a smart guy. I think he's a pretty authentic communicator. He's shown his ability to negotiate in tough files when he was in Indigenous Affairs, and the file that he has that he won in the great kerfuffle, if you will, of 2023, is about to get red hot. So immigration is going to be a really, really challenging file in the coming year.
He's a superb deputy too, by the way, Christiane Fox.
Yeah. Well, it's going to all be needed because he's got a tough needle to thread. And I think that the early signs, what he's putting out this year, are really interesting. So he is going head on at the issue of whether the immigration targets are worsening housing affordability pressures in Canada. He is squaring his sights on the absolutely astronomical number of temporary residents that Canada has been letting in. What I'm going to be really interested to see is if he goes all the way on that into the real nut of the issue, which is not foreign students. It is the temporary foreign worker program, which for too long has been allowed to grow and allowing people to bring in
business
temporary
subsidy,
workers.
isn't it?
It's totally a business subsidy that is allowing businesses to not pay the wages that Canadian workers are demanding. And so we're going to see if he's going to go at that. He's going to go at the generously given labor market opinions that have undergirded all of this. So we'll see what happens there. But, he is also out there talking about things like a path to citizenship for undocumented people. This is really important stuff that the government has left undone for many years. And so I commend him for taking that stuff on. I am watching with great interest to see how he's going to navigate all this. I hope he's successful. These are really important issues. It's really important that the immigration file not dissolve into a xenophobic shit show. So I hope he does it right. I hope he does it well. And I think he's a really interesting person to watch this year.
Interesting. Kory, who's your pick?
John Rustad, the BC Conservative leader. Somebody that not a lot of folks know, with a party that has, we've seen iterations of. But I encourage everyone to listen to Hotel Pacifico, the sister podcast on BC politics. It's a part of the air quotes media network. But, there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in BC, and I think he's driving it. And so I'm kind of curious to learn a little bit more about the guy over the coming year, because I think he's got momentum, and that's interesting to watch.
He's leading a realignment, you think?
Yeah, I think so. But there's been a bit of a vacuum. The rebranding of the BC Liberals has maybe not gone as perfectly as people would have liked. But I think there's probably some leadership issues there too. It's maybe less the party label and more about why is it that you're running? What is it that your offering is? What is it that is the problem with the existing government? What is it that is your solution? The kind of framing that you're seeing Poilievre do effectively, and that any opposition party that wants to become the government has to go through. You're just not seeing happening within the BC Liberals right now. So I kind of feel interested to see whether Falcone gets his mojo back or finds it in the first place, and whether or not Rustad and the BC Conservatives are actually able to put something together here.
And it's dubious whether he has mojo, I think, Kory.
Yeah, well, we're going to find out. That's why one to watch.
Scott.
Francois Legault. I think there's a really strong possibility that he's going to quit this year. I don't think we joked about this on the pod before. I don't think this guy is built to be behind in the polls. I don't think he likes it. I think he wants to be king shit of Turd Island, and he doesn't like it when he's being contested or confronted with disagreement and challenge. And so I think that he's going to. I think this is admittedly going to be a longer term play in 2024, but I think he's going to bail in November, December of 2024 and just say, all right, fuck this noise. My poll numbers haven't improved, and I don't want to be sitting around for this. I don't want to compete in an election where I might lose. That's not what I'm all for. And as I, cruise towards 70 years old. So I think he's going to leave, and I think it's going to cause turmoil in Quebec politics. And I think what causes turmoil in Quebec politics causes turmoil at the federal level. And by the way, I'll put a little asterisk in for Susan Holt, who I think is going to beat Blaine Higgs like a drum at some point this year. And that also is going to be in defiance of kind of we got an in and out.
I want that to happen.
From your lips to God's ears, Scott.
I want that to happen, Scott. I really dislike Higgs a lot. But I think it's really hard to see Liberals picking up provincial governments in this environment in the next year or two. I just don't see that happening.
And I just think that Higgs is going to make Higgs eclipses that, and so it's.
If he was running in Toronto, if he was running in Toronto, but he's running.
Look at his poll numbers in New Brunswick.
Yeah, but I also think it's about his own management of his caucus. It's about the priorities he's putting forward. It's about how he's dealing with people in Atlantic Canada are not living a great life right now. There's a lot of pessimism, and I think that there is an opportunity for his opponents to capitalize on that. We'll see.
By the way, when you're looking at polls in New Brunswick, you need to bear in mind that Brian Gallant, in the election he lost, beat Brian Higgs by 7 points in the popular vote and lost the seat.
It's such a strange province, the way it breaks out rural and French and English.
North and south, and yeah.
But I'll go back to Legault. I'll be very surprised if Legault competes the next election. And I think that 2024 is the year he'll bail.
Right. Well, given the underlying tectonic plates of Quebec politics, that likely means something that we like less, not something we like more. But
quite possibly.
Right. I think the surprise politician of the year is going to be Peter MacKay, because I think he's going to announce that he's running in Central Nova for Poilievre.
What's surprising about that?
And I think that the Poilievre people really want him, because I think the Poilievre people really want to beat Sean Fraser. I think that they have identified Sean Fraser as somebody that could someday beat them, and so they're going to eliminate him as quickly as they can in a bad election in Atlantic Canada for the Liberals with a great candidate against them. So if you're thinking about the Liberal Party in the year 2030, you might want to contribute to Sean Fraser in Central Nova. Next category. Conventional wisdom about 2024 is correct about what, Scott?
That Trump will win. And I know
Yes.
I know that's terrifying, and I know it's going to break the world, and I know it's going to reshape politics everywhere. But I have held out this long hope that Biden would actually say, "I was just head faking. Okay, I'm not running." But we've got Iowa and New Hampshire staring us down. I don't think Biden's leaving. I think he's going to run. And between the economy and the fact that he looks like he's an extra from Driving Miss Daisy. I just think it's
The underliers are so bad for him, Scott. It is, frankly, only Trump's candidacy that makes this thing even remotely close. Like, given the underliers, Kory, Biden should be getting smoked.
Yeah, and I think I tend to agree. That was going to be my pick as well. I'll make a different pick now for the sake of diversity. But it's the economy, and if it wasn't for all of the other parts of Trump that are unpleasant, then it wouldn't be close. But you could say it another way too. If Trump wasn't the candidate, it wouldn't be close. It's Biden is in very difficult position, and as I've said before, he looks like somebody in a senior's home in Fort Lauderdale shuffling quickly to get an elevator. Like, he looks frail and old and weak, and at a time when the world is entering deeper and deeper conflict. And
how important do you think the age thing is, Kory? Like, let me ask you this.
I think it's overwhelmingly the driver.
Let me ask you this question. So, for instance, people are super negative on Biden's handling of the economy, and people puzzle about this because actually, you can make an argument that soft landing and all that kind of stuff, they've actually managed it reasonably well, but his numbers are terrible. And I look at that and I wonder, how much of it's because people can't believe he would be good at it anymore?
Yeah, he projects weakness. He does not project strength, and he projects frailty. The visual is.
But what campaign have we ever been
of everything?
Like name a campaign where the candidate that's perceived as strong and demonstrating strong leadership loses to the one that looks weak and is demonstrating weak leadership traits. Like, this is really down to dogs in the dog kennel a little bit around this stuff, where you've got, if you want to be top dog, you've got to be dominant, and you've got to appear to be dominant compared to the other alternatives. And, I don't know, Kathleen Wynne, for example, always looked like she was the alpha in the races that she won, right? Like, if you want to use examples like that, the stronger candidate tends to do better, in maybe not in every case, but in almost every case. But I think that's overwhelmingly the driver here. Look at the amount of conflict and war going on in the world this year. And, if I were to say, what do I think conventional wisdom's right around this year? We're going to see even more of it. I think we're going to see an expansion of the conflict that's going on right now in the Middle East. All arrows are pointing in that direction, and sadly and unfortunately, I think that's where it's going to go. But in that environment, does a Trump presidency resonate better than a Biden presidency? I think so, because he looks like an alpha, and it's a weird confluence of two things. He is a isolationist alpha, somebody who looks like they can make threats from across the ocean and keep people in line without actually having to go and engage in conflict and deploy troops in yet another Middle Eastern war. So I think that's all trending in his direction. And on the economy, hey, look, on macro numbers, the economy looks like it's doing well in the United States. The problem is that 2/3 of the population of the United States is not experiencing that upside. They're experiencing, prices for food and things that are aggregate 20% higher than they were before, and they haven't gotten a raise. And so the fact that some asshole in the stock market made, another $1 billion is not really helping them in their day-to-day life, which is why I think you see so much unhappiness despite what are, GDP numbers that are on the growth side that are pretty impressive, especially compared to Canada.
And when young people are just bailing on Biden, right? They don't feel as though they are getting benefits from the economy in the US. They feel as though there are big commitments that Biden made that went unfulfilled. And some of that stuff was out of his control, right? With the Supreme Court overturning the student debt plan and things like that. And he's also losing support because of his support for Israel in the conflict. Like that's also demotivating big segments of Democratic voters. So he's got a real problem. But I'm going to be counter. I'm going to be counter to the group, and I'm going to bring a new conventional wisdom right issue that's domestic. So I think it's going to be the continued focus on affordability and cost of living pain for voters here in Canada. So even though interest rates have obviously slowed and we're going to maybe start to see cuts soon and inflation is slowing, I think there's two things that are going to stick around this year that are really going to drive the conversation here in Canada. And the first one is the massive number of mortgages up for renewal this year. So that's half of Canadian mortgage holders are up for renewal in the next 2 years. And these are people who got their mortgages at a time when interest rates were rock bottom. So there's a lot of anxiety around that. And I think that feeling is going to move a lot of stuff for voters this year in Canada. And the other thing is prices. So even though inflation has slowed, prices are still stuck pretty high. Like food prices are still higher than they were and higher than they should be. And so that issue of just day-to-day cost of living pressure is going to stay with us. And I think that that's something that is going to continue to really shape the politics here in Canada over the next year, and one that politicians would be wise to hew close to.
Think how much higher they're going to be after you throw all the foreign workers out who are picking food in the greenhouses in Essex and places like that. Man, oh man, you got to pick which narrative you want to be on that
one. We can't believe inconsistent things, Kory.
No, Kory.
We can all the time. It's actually something we celebrate every week on this podcast.
I just believe that if people are good enough to come and work here, they're good enough to stay.
I'm the chief celebrant of said approach. So,
conventional wisdom Reid 2024 is incorrect about what, Kory?
That Trump, the U.S. election campaign, and if Trump ends up being the president, that is going to be a driver in Canadian politics to any significant degree. I think that is even more wishful thinking than the provinces are going to try to foist private health care and somehow save the federal Liberal Party from its impending doom. Look, I don't think it's gonna matter a hill of beans outside of the pearl clutching class and the Canadian media who like to go on and on about this. I don't think it's a real thing. I think people are going to be motivated to vote on Canadian politics around people running in Canada and issues in Canada.
The numbers in Canada on Trump are staggering, right? Like the vast majority of conservative voters in Canada really hate Donald Trump.
Yeah. So, and then when I still think that Coletto poll of several months ago now that showed, who do Canadians trust more to deal with the Trump presidency, Justin Trudeau, or Pierre Poilievre, that Pierre Poilievre has like a fucking 20-point lead. So, where is the data that supports this conventional wisdom notion that I keep hearing repeated in the commentariat and by mainstream media columnists across the board? I just don't see it. Like, show me the data, and maybe you'll convince me.
Kory's pick is close enough to mine that I'm just going to pile on. My conventional wisdom is wrong about the idea that a Trump presidency can in any way help bolster Justin Trudeau's fortunes. I think it's wishful thinking. I think that there will be some knock-on effects in Canadian politics, but I actually think that they will tend to benefit Poilievre. I think it drives a polarization in political discourse. I think it makes people believe that we need a strongman type leader to confront a strong man, and that's actually what the Abacus poll sort of bears out in that. And I think that overall, my main beef with that argument is that it hews way too close to just sitting back and waiting for events to be a saving grace for Trudeau. And I think I think it's both wrong.
Well, that's what you do, Jordan, when you believe that you are right, and all you need is for people to come to the conclusion that you are right.
Yeah, and that actually is pretty much the nut of the problem for this government. So that's, anyway, going to cast my lot in with Kory on that prediction.
Excellent. Scott, what do you got?
I'm going to come back to this whole topic a little later, particularly to Jordan's point about the idea that Trump is going to disrupt everything, everywhere upon his re-election, or his election, I should say, I guess, and that it means that you just sit around waiting for it to occur, because I have a different take on that. But my pick is that interest rates and the lag and people's overall attitudes towards the economy are going to take forever to correct. I actually think that 2024 is going to surprise us. I think the Bank of Canada is going to be forced. I think that things are worse than we think right now in terms of GDP and overall economic activity. I think it's going to force the bank's hands. I think they're going to cut interest rates more rapidly, more deeply than people think. I think that that's going to be a dominant part of the discussion. And I think by the fall, it's going to start to alter people's perspectives. And I know people think I'm dreaming in Technicolor. I'm not saying that that reverses the world for Justin Trudeau, but I think we're underestimating how quickly economic conditions are going to shift, and how quickly people are going to absorb and react to that. I think I really think we're getting this wrong. I think that I think we're going to see massive cuts.
Well, but Scott, like, one of the things I keep thinking when I hear about this sort of Cinderella dream that the economy is going to turn around, everyone's going to
Jesus Christ, get a new talking point. Everything is a fucking fever dream.
Well, okay, but here's
predictions.
No, but here's what the predictions are on economic growth, and I think this is part of what's driving the problem with Trudeau's numbers is like it's flat. Like, we are not growing the way.
That's my point. And consequently, the Bank of Canada is going to have to cut interest rates much more deeply and rapidly than is currently predicted.
But they're saying the opposite. So, and do we think that that's actually going to drive it? Because, like, I think there's a different cure here and a different narrative around that that's, I think, far more compelling and far more likely to be the case. We have to start building things again in Canada. We have to get moving on in a number of areas, whether it's manufacturing, whether it's resource development, whether it's building out our power grid. Like, all of this stuff requires a government that doesn't sit pondering the environmental impact of things from now till the end of time. Like, and without being 5-6 years to a maybe on every major development project that's out there, you can't grow an economy.
Okay. My point is that
it's not going to be the Bank of Canada.
People work on this.
Stephen Guilbeault.
Conventional wisdom operates on the assumption that the way people feel about the economy now is how they will continue to feel throughout 2024. I think that's dead wrong.
You can feel however you want about the economy. If you're never getting a permit to build anything, the economy is never getting any fucking better.
Conventional wisdom is incorrect that the Liberals need to get millennials back, the people that voted for Trudeau in 2015, that they've lost them to the left and the right and they need to get them back. I think they're going to be the toughest group to come back. And I think that the priority ought to be for the Liberals, older Canadians, and particularly older women, who in recent months have shifted from Liberal to Conservative. It's very recent. They could switch their minds back. If the Liberals took 4 points off the Conservative total, it would completely change the political conversation in the country right now. And all of the things the Liberals did as a government would be viewed differently than they're being viewed right now. I think that ought to be an imperative, is to immediately start going after the older Canadians who are going to vote in the election and in large numbers, and who have traditionally been very supportive of this government, but they've lost them. And there's no reason to lose them to Poilievre. He voted for age of entitlement to be 67. Danielle Smith's trying to blow up the CPP. There's no reason why those votes are sitting with the Conservatives. All right.
100% agree. Those are the true shoulder voters in the electorate right now.
The no shame oddball prediction of the year. Jordan, lead us off with your no shame oddball prediction of the year.
Okay, I'm going to make two. One more odd than the other, and they're both provincial. So my first prediction is that I think EB's going to pretty much cruise to another majority, but I think that BC United is going to be demolished, and we're going to see the BC Conservatives take official opposition, which will be kind of fun to watch in BC politics. And then my second oddball prediction, that is more oddball, is that I think that the Saskatchewan NDP is going to give Scott Moe a run for their money, and I think that they will come close to doubling their seats.
Okay, well, that's two different things. Okay.
Yes.
Kory and I were just in Saskatchewan. Right. All right. I think the NDP.
I know you're going to have thoughts. You're going to have thoughts.
I think the NDP will double their seats because I think the NDP will win everything but a handful of seats in Regina or Saskatoon. Right. The problem is that the Conservative margins in the rural seats are so enormous.
So huge.
That the NDP would have to win everything in Saskatchewan that you could conceivably call urban in order to win the government. They got to win Moose Jaw. They've got to win Prince Albert. They've got to win Yorkton. They've got to win. I mean, and they're not going to win all those seats. So I just, as much as I want it to be true, Jordan,
I'm not saying they're going to win government. I'm saying they're going to give Moe a run for his money.
But they're not, because they can't beat him. So they can make it closer. And for me, the interesting thing in Saskatchewan is going to be whether a closer fight with the NDP makes Moe move toward the center, or makes him reinforce his rural base and go further to the right.
I think we may see a more moderate Scott Moe come out this year, but that's my prediction.
I don't know. Like, look, the dynamics in terms of that rural, urban, et cetera, it's not completely analogous to what we're talking about with New Brunswick, but it's not completely different either. And you put your finger on the salient point, David, in terms of what that looks like. So yeah, like, look, I agree with everything you just said around how that dynamic plays out in the province.
All right, my no shame oddball prediction of the year is that the Liberals, and this is not a prediction so much as it's a hope. I guess that's what makes it an oddball thing, because there's no reason to make this prediction. But my prediction is that the Liberals turn Poilievre's debt message into a liability, because we all know two truths of politics. One truth is that people want balanced budgets, and second truth is that people don't want spending cuts. And right now, there's only one side of that message out there. And I think that the Liberals can maneuver this and create some wedges, especially with a budget coming up, that will make that issue a little bit more uncomfortable for Poilievre to be riding as hard as he's riding it. Scott, what's your oddball prediction?
Freeland won't be finance minister by the end of the year. And I don't know if that means that she departs, which I think is probably possible.
Who is Andrew Bevan? Who is Andrew Bevan?
I hope so. I'd like to see that. He can run in a by-election of my creation in the riding of Scott Says So. But I think that either a desire to bring in new blood, to alter, to set a new stage, or she'll move into a post-political role, something. I just think this is going to change. A desire to get Carney in. I just think, if I'm looking at an oddball prediction, I just don't think she's going to be at finance by the end of this year. So that's my oddball prediction, and I will stand by it until it's demonstrated to be incorrect.
All right, we'll deal with that next year. Kory, you got one?
I think that the federal Liberals government is going to increasingly swallow itself whole on a number of the environmental initiatives that have been central to its narrative up until this point. I think we saw the first element of that with the reversal on carbon tax on home heating fuel. But I think the far more substantial things that are going to be coming to a head are going to be around, larger resource development and other projects driven by the Supreme Court throwing out their environmental impact assessment legislation. They're going to have to take their foot off the gas and start tapping the brakes around some of those key initiatives in a way that I think will be disheartening to my good and dear friend, Stephen Guilbeault, and make people on that side of their electoral coalition uncomfortable. I think they're going to stick with them anyway. But I think that's going to go a lot further than people are predicting or expecting.
Kory, why is Premier Ford not joining in the carbon tax beating, like all the Ontarians that use natural gas? I haven't heard him be as vocal on this as I thought he might.
Well, it's playing prominently in the advertising campaign that's running on the airwaves in Ontario right now around carbon tax. It's deeply unpopular in the province with anyone who would ever consider voting Conservative, and a lot of people who wouldn't consider voting Conservative. So, it's happening. And look, the Ontario government is party to all the same suits that Scott Moe and other premiers are on. Like, I'm not sure if we're doing our clipping, but we were going to do it on Wad Canoe, saying that it's time to rethink the carbon tax and to give people a break on it. So I think there's to
come from the left, man. To come from the left, that is
but he's in company, right? Like but
it's part of what's driving my prediction here. That I think you're seeing the foundation of that electoral coalition around environmental issues is crumbling, and what's driving that is cost of living pressures. What's driving that is it's fine to say we're going to rebalance the rules around these things in a way to make sure the environment's more of a part of consideration. That only works if things are actually getting built and getting done. But if economic growth is basically zero and people are seeing their paychecks erode because of inflation, and they're seeing their mortgage going up because of related interest rate hikes, the environment goes from a driving political issue to one that's very much on the back burner and in the back seat. And I think that's going to continue to play out over the course of this year, but far more than people are anticipating where we're sitting today.
Okay, let's just do a quick drive-by of our clipping right now. So it's from David Baxter in Global News. Here's a segment from it. Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew says that it is time to take another look at how the federal carbon price is applied in his province. I think there's an argument that Manitoba is maybe one of the strongest cases you could make that the price on carbon should be revisited in our jurisdiction, Kinew told West Block host Mercedes Stevenson. It's definitely something that I know Manitobans would like to see some help with. We've put a lot of hard work in over the past 5 decades to build a low-carbon electricity grid. We've paid the down payment on that mortgage. We're in a position to have a low-carbon economy going into the future. Scott, what do you think are the implications of this?
Well, I'll come through a slightly different door than Kory, and I agree with a lot of what he just said. But the twist I would put on it is I think that this could be a lifeline for the Liberals. I think it could be a huge opportunity. Rather than saying, oh my God, now that this is also coming from the left, right? An NDP premier saying this, my God, we're really under battle guns, and we have to get even more defiant. And I think they should say, you know what? Let's read the room and use it as an opportunity to say, well, this guy is giving us a path out of this political knot. And so I think that it's an opportunity to start discussions and say, all right, well, how would we undo this, and what would we do instead that would still form a credible, competent climate change program? How do you move to cap and trade? What do we do with the rebates that go to people? How do we manage all of that? I would, instead of saying, go fuck yourself, Wab Kinew, you're as bad as the rest of them, and we are going to hold firm on this, even though we didn't on Atlantic Canada, but that was it. That's the last one. I would say, let's have a discussion then and create some space for themselves where they don't seem dogmatic on this issue, which is such a punishing anchor that drags them down. And so I don't know how it will unfold, but I'd be looking at this not as an assault, but as an opportunity.
Jordan, what would happen? What would happen to the federal NDP vote if Jagmeet Singh jumped on this bandwagon?
Well, he kind of already has, right?
If that's true, I don't know it.
He voted with the Conservatives on an Opposition Day motion before the break about expanding the exemptions around the carbon tax for home heating to other jurisdictions. The New Democrats have made a clear decision. You can see it more clearly at the provincial level with Kinew, but the feds have also made the same call. They are not going to die on the altar of the tool of the carbon tax as the specific tool for reducing emissions. Because frankly, the Liberals have so badly bungled the politics and the communication around it that it's politically irredeemable at this point. So they are not going to go to bat for something that the Trudeau government themselves seems incapable of defending and has become such a poison well. And so, I think Scott's got some good advice there for the Liberals, but I think they would require a personality transplant for the party to even remotely consider doing some judo like that. They're not going to. And I think that what you see from Canoe is actually, it's entirely consistent with how he campaigned. You remember he campaigned on lifting the provincial fuel tax. So this is, and I mean, you can also contrast it a bit with Mo, right? So he's not out there saying we're going to unilaterally stop collecting. He's out there saying we deserve the same consideration, for example, that people in Atlantic Canada got. And he's making an argument about the significant investments that have already been made in Manitoba around hydro and things like that.
But the difference, I would argue,
different conversation.
I always get shit when I interrupt you, Jordan. I'm sorry. But
that's okay.
You always say interesting things, and they provoke me to have something to say back to you, which is to say Canoe seems focused on reducing the cost of government on his citizens.
Yes.
I do not hear that message from the NDP. I hear getting more government money to citizens. I do not hear anything about the reverse.
Yeah, so I think on the federal level, what I'd say around that is that Singh and the NDP are not primarily messaging on the issue of carbon tax. It's not a great issue for them. It is fraught politically for them because they take heat from the environmentalists every time they go out and they push back against the carbon tax in any way. But I think that when you look at that issue specifically, the party has put out some breadcrumbs around it. So you've got Singh out there talking about lifting the GST on home heating across the board, which is something that would apply in every jurisdiction for every type of fuel. You've got him tacitly agreeing on the issue of more carve-outs on the carbon tax for home heating in other jurisdictions. So to me, those are pretty, like, they had some pretty clear decision points. And Singh and his caucus with him made the call that they can make an argument around climate without hewing to the tool of the carbon tax. And I think it's smart. Like, they cannot go to bat for machinery of government on this when it has been so bungled by the Trudeau Liberals. They just have to walk away from this and they have to make their environmental arguments elsewhere. And so I think that's what you're seeing. This is going to continue to be an argument that is primarily useful for the Conservatives. So I don't think you're going to see the federal New Democrats lead with that as their affordability edge. They're going to look for other places to do that around things like grocery prices, around things like, the dental and the pharma and things like that. That's where they've chosen to put their eggs. But I think that it's very interesting that you've seen them put out some pretty clear markers that distance themselves very strongly from the Liberals on this particular issue.
I'll just say that when people are struggling with the cost of living, you can talk to them about programs that you could introduce to help them. But intuitively, the most obvious thing for people is let me keep more of my money.
Totally. I totally agree with you. And this is a really big challenge this has always been a big challenge for the New Democrats federally, right? Because they need to find a way to have that click for we're going to make your day-to-day pocketbook issues easier. And the easiest argument to make is tax breaks. But of course, for a variety of reasons, that is not the first argument that New Democrats want to make. So you see them trying to find creative ways to make it. And I think that there are some, like the GST, HST off home heating, like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, why are we paying tax on that? That's a great argument. And I think hopefully they're going to find some other ones like that to pick up and run with this year.
Well, the argument, though, is that you're going to increase the cost of energy and then you're going to have people want to use less. And like it is debasing the carbon tax, through a different mechanism, right? Which I tend to agree with
that.
But like that's ultimately what it is. Yeah. But I think for all of the behind the scenes posturing of Guilbeault around this stuff, or the stuff he's done publicly, like, saying, if there are any more carve outs, essentially that I'm out of here, I won't be the minister any longer. Like that tension's going to continue to play out. I think the net benefactor in this, because, as I just said, I think the Liberals they're going to bow to what you're talking about. I think they're going to largely take your advice, whether it's directly or whether it's through, larger rebates that debase it in another fashion. Like, I think the carbon tax is going to be diminished. It's not going to be what was planned or promised. Whether it's through exemptions, rebates, other mechanisms. I think that's probably happening. This, if the Greens ever got their shit together, would be a big boon for them. Like, I think they would do a lot better the next election, because I think that environmental vote is not going to be fought over between the NDP and the Liberals increasingly. I think it's going to be going to the Greens, because they're the only ones who are going to hold true to those concepts and principles. Electoral politics be damned.
Well, this is a show of predictions.
Well, that last part is sure true.
There's a show of predictions, and I'll make one that I believe to be almost 100% unassailably true, is that in 2027, there will not be a carbon tax in Canada.
Yeah.
One way or another.
Yeah.
Right? There will not be a carbon tax.
I think there may not be a consumer.
That's what I mean. There will not be a consumer. That's what I mean by that.
But even for the Conservatives, when it comes to carbon pricing at the industrial level, like, that's where there is commonality at the federal and provincial level. Where you'll see differences of opinion is at what rate and what time and what's realistic, and what industry should bear the brunt of it. Like, you'll have disagreements that are predictable based on what different provincial economies look like. But there is generally support across the board on the industrial side. It's the consumer side. That's really where people are got their back up on it, and I think rightfully so.
Right. Okay. Let's swing around and wrap this up. We have one more of Scott's games to play, which is our New Year's resolution.
Leapfrog.
New Year's resolution. Scott, lead us off. What's your New Year's resolution to somebody? We're giving this to somebody.
My New Year's resolution is to the Prime Minister's office, Max Valiquette, the new communications director, whatever, the team that's going to be thinking about how to plot 2024 out. And here's my suggestion. You're going to have a U.S. presidential election. We all think, and we talked about it earlier, that Trump is going to win. We all, I think, agree, even though Kory says it won't affect Trudeau. We'll have to see. But I know it's going to be a massive disruptive event around the world, in the United States and in Canada. It's going to reorganize the way people think about politics and their lives and what they expect of their leaders. And so you've got that. But you've also got a shitload of international travel, as you always do. So this is where, the government is low on the polls.
Peace mission. You're going to a peace mission, aren't you?
No, I'm not. I'm saying have a plan, right? These international summits are never used to any genuine benefit from a partisan perspective or electoral perspective. But you can sit in a room right now for the next 3 weeks in January without the House in session, and you can look at the map of international events that the Prime Minister is obligated to go to. You can look at the campaign that's going to start to unfold later this month in the United States, culminating in the election of Trump in November. And you can say, these things are happening. Now, what do we do? What use can we make of this? How can we position ourselves? What tools can we employ? What levers can we pull that make it better for us rather than worse for us? That allow us to set up to be a beneficiary of something rather than just corks in a river that are floating along and reacting and hoping we don't get dashed on the rocks of the shores. So I think that it's going to be a big year internationally. And I think that if I was in the Prime Minister's office, my New Year's resolution is don't just sit back and shrug it and say, well, we'll do a debrief in advance of each one of these international events, and then we'll sort of react as we can. Think about it now. Try to actually make some utility of it. Have a fucking plan, because you need one, man.
There we go. All right. Jordan, New Year's resolution.
Mine is going out to the federal New Democrats, and it's a version of it's the economy, stupid. So this is a year, there's going to be many temptations along the road, many issues that are not related to how people are experiencing affordability in their day-to-day lives. And I mean this in the economy in the large sense. So wages, cost of living, all of that stuff. And I think it's going to be have to be a New Year's resolution on the part of the leaders team and caucus to keep that experience that voters are having at the core of the work that they're doing. And so that means not getting bogged down in, for example, details on pharmacare and dying on that particular hill. Pick a different, better hill to die on. Get something and then move on. And make sure that you're not painting yourself into a corner and blowing up the CSA at a moment that's not advantageous for you. Make it work for you, do not work for it. There's also going to be all sorts of other issues happening. In Canada, we're going to see the issue of trans kids, sadly, horribly, is going to be used as a political cudgel by weak conservative premiers. State your piece, but do not get drawn in. Do not linger there. You need to keep the affordability, the economy issues at the center. There's going to be global events. There's going to be, sadly, I think there's going to be Trump. There's going to be just continued horror in Gaza, in Israel. Stay focused. You have to make sure that you are hewing to those affordability, those economy issues that voters are experiencing. And there'll be a reward for that at the end of the year if you're able to do so.
Awesome. All right, Kory, who do you got a New Year's resolution for?
For Pierre Poilievre, I think he should, as a New Year's resolution, spend less time in Ottawa. I think that while he is a good performer in question period, and in a way, kind of reminds me of opposition leaders that we've seen in the past.
I was going to say, I worked for a really excellent
You worked for one, but I think the prosecutorial sort of, throwing of barbs in question period, well, it gets the troops all wound up in a positive way. I think there's a better version of Poilievre that we've seen, and it's not just the stuff in the ads. I think it's the big rallies. I think it's this ability to actually craft an economic narrative and roll out a storyline to a big room of people, and almost in a evangelical revival sort of way. And I don't mean it in the religious sense, but in that notion of being able to tell a story and get a big room of people behind them and energized. I think the value of that is the kind of energy that will be better for him, both in terms of not contradicting the image that I think has been really carefully crafted through their advertising, but I think it's a deeper level of motivation for the people who are hearing it. And so it's always going to be tempting, especially when you got a young family and all of that, to be in Ottawa and do 3 days a week at question period. I would do 1 day a week at question period. I would kind of put in the bare minimum on that and spend the rest of the time doing those sorts of larger rallies and events and getting the story out that way. Get better press. I think it's more in alignment with this image that he's that's the best image of him. So
I love it when Kory's been back to the source in Saskatchewan. Yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Well, Ottawa's his weakest territory, right?
Yeah. Well,
Ottawa's the weakest place for him to play politics right now, because there's a lot of traps in Ottawa for him.
There's traps, but it's also where you get your worst media coverage. That's where the folks who are least in alignment with him in the media are. But you also get sucked into the worst elements of what caucus is too, because they have a list of issues and things that are often very different than what the folks out there have. And I think if you're out meeting with people in that way, you're going to be kept on the straight and narrow in terms of the same issue set. Frankly, I agree with Jordan's concept of what the right issue set is. That's all true for both the government and the Conservative Party. The economy and cost of living and the intersection with that and people's daily lives is where the voters are. So the more you're there, the better you're going to be doing.
All right. My New Year's resolution goes out to everybody in the Liberal caucus who thinks they should be the next leader. The Prime Minister may even believe that he's going to run in the next election, but there's a more than 50% chance, based on current polling, that he does not, and that sometime in early 2025, he pulls the plug. And you should be ready, and it's not disloyal to be ready. You should spend this year showing some leg, trying to build some profile with people. There's nothing wrong with organizing and putting together networks. People need to be ready for what is likely to happen, which is a leadership change in 2025. And we're going to need to elevate somebody from almost nowheresville to prominence in a very quick period of time. And so the better prepared you are to do that, the better chance we'll all have.
Okay, good advice. Can I count on your support, David?
If you're in, buddy, I'm in.
All right.
I bet even Kory and Jordan would get behind that.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe for different reasons.
Exactly.
Only if you can create a new cabinet position and put me in it. And the title I want is Generalissimo. So just keep that in mind.
You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen.
All right, let's wind it up with Mr. Pinson.
Ladies and gentlemen, please return to your seats. The Hey Yous are about to begin.
Okay. Scott, you got a hey you?
Yeah, my hey you. We've mentioned his name a couple times today. I want to give a hey you out to Andrew Bevin, Minister Freeland, and the Department of Finance. They did something smart. Given that they were going to, just before Christmas, given that they had made the decision they were going to approve the takeover of HSBC, which is wildly unpopular, could be politically divisive, they managed to keep a lid on that debate. They managed to keep that potentially very smelly kettle of fish away from people's nostrils. And then they approved it on the 21st of December, 2 days before the weekend, 4 days before Christmas. That's the way you bury something. Well done.
Excellent. Kory?
Well, my hey you was I'm unprepared here. I kind of thought it was going to be our New Year's resolution.
We always have a hey you.
Well, I'm going to do a hey you to all of our listeners out there, and to say, as we were talking about earlier, lots of interesting stuff going on in BC. I'm going to be trying to spend a little more time thinking about that and understanding that and listening to that. So my hey you is everyone who's listening to this podcast, go and subscribe and follow Hotel Pacifico and
Nice.
do that and join on that journey with me.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah, it's a
Thank
good
you,
one.
Kory. You, Jordan.
So my hey you is going out to, such as they are, the Oppo teams in the Liberal leader's office and the NDP. I mean, maybe more to the NDP since we've established that the red team doesn't care too much to this sort of thing. But there is an opportunity before you. So Melissa Lantsman is out saying, don't worry, folks, you're going to hear more about what Conservatives are going to cut in our platform. Just wait and see. You're going to hear our plans for what we're going to cut to control the debt in our platform.
No, you won't.
Friends, don't wait. Do not wait. Fill in that blank for them. Fill in that blank for them now. Start your engines. Are they going to cut? Are they going to cut all these new, as Kory so adores calling them, all these new entitlement programs? Is dental for seniors that's coming in this year? Is that going to be cut? What's going to happen to your carbon tax rebates, your climate whatever payments? Are you get to keep those even if there's no consumer carbon price? I want to know. We want to know all this stuff. Get out there and make some suggestions to fill in that blank for voters.
Excellent, Jordan. And in fact, I would go a step further. I would just assert that he's going to do things and make him deny them, right? Because he won't say. So I would just say, well, he's going to do this.
Yeah.
My hey you goes out to my good friend, despite being a Boston Bruins fan and a fan of progressive rock, my good friend Steve McKinnon. And this is a good example. He's become the House leader for the Liberal government. And this is a good example of never to take my political advice, because I told Steve not to run back in 2015. Because I told Steve he'd never be a cabinet minister. White man from the Outaouais, an English white man from the Outaouais, is never going to find his way into the cabinet. Yet here he is. And he's here because he's really good. He's really talented. He will be particularly effective at this job. And congratulations, Steve McKinnon.
And also a shout out to Karina Gould, who really did a fabulous job, and good luck on the mat leave.
I think you just made me look like an asshole. Did you just make me look like an asshole?
I would never.
Gotta be, David.
David, can I try to wedge in with like a little bit of a
patriarchy hat on?
David, can I wedge in with a little bit of a 2.0 hey you? Because I actually was thinking about this when we were out in Saskatchewan. Just a quick shout out to the family of Joe Donlevy, who was Brad Wolf's longtime chief of staff, who passed quite suddenly and at a much younger age than you ever would like to see anyone go at. But somebody who played a really big role in politics in Saskatchewan. I know that there were a lot of people who came together to recognize his contribution over the Christmas holidays. So, hey you to those folks as well.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Thank the four of you. Thank the three of you. Is it 2014? Are there four of you or three of you? I don't even know what the fuck is going on anymore. In any event,
I think it's 2025. This pod's been so goddamn long.
It has been very long. We had a lot to talk about, as it turns out. Anyways, it was great to hang out with the three of you. I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsor, CN. All of you who waited patiently for 3 weeks for a new Curse of Politics, we're back, and thank you for waiting patiently for it. We'll see you next week with more of the Curse of Politics. See you then.